There we go. We're live.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
We're live and only on YouTube, which is a blessed relief for all concerned. And we are, of course, joined by the wonderful Gareth Russell. Thank you so much. Before we hop in, I am going to do the disclaimer, I think. Shall I?
Yes,
one quick disclaimer.
Yes,
you may hear a child in the background. He's not in bed yet. So we'll struggle through. Welcome, friends. It's just gone 8:15. It is History After Dark. We call it that because we made it when it was after dark, and it is now, but also because it does fit, because we do like to talk about history with a side of the macabre, with a lean towards the filth. We want to talk about innuendo, innuendo, and we want to do it with four-letter expletives, which we don't do on any of our other platforms. So welcome to the Thunderdome, friends. With that being said, if you happen to be in an open plan office with a judgmental boss, put a headphone in. This is how you get in a disciplinary situation. If you're in a car or a living room or a kitchen with a small child who is a problem, we call this child Timmy. And as you can see, he is a problem. Timmy is the sort of child that hears one depraved thing one time, locks it away in his mind palace, takes it into school with him, and then recounts it to his teacher. In my mind, this teacher is Miss Honey. She, because she doesn't watch History After Dark, doesn't know the first rule of History After Dark, which is, if you don't know what it means, don't Google it. It's not for you. So Miss Honey Googles it. She is now utterly and completely devastated by what she's seen. So you get called up to school. You've got to explain why Miss Honey is crying in a corner and needs 15 weeks of therapy that you're going to have to help pay for, and also why Timmy knows the thing he knows. It's not fun for anybody. Put a headphone in. Alternatively, you can always watch us on the playback. I say that it is best to watch us live because on occasion we do say something that is so unspeakably, so unutterably depraved that we will have to yeet that footage into the sun. It's happened once before, but now we've got Gareth, and he might look sweet and innocent, but this could potentially be the time where it gets so filthy it's got to go back into the sun. So it's always best to watch us live. That is our first rule. Our next rule is we do hope that you're all adults. Please be all adults. So you can make your own choices, but we do not approve this being a drinking game. We are not going to be responsible for your renal functions. This will never be medical nor legal advice. Please don't sue. And the final thing is, with this disclaimer that I have handcrafted so beautifully, if at any point someone puts in the comments, it's very interesting, but I don't like it when you swear, we know what you're doing. We know that you've got a shaming kink, and we are not going to give you what you want because kinks are fine. We aren't ever gonna be like no kinks, but kink without consent is a no-go. That's the disclaimer. Hello, Gareth. I'm sorry.
I loved absolutely everything about that. Everything about it.
And look at your beautiful book. Yes, look at it.
And we've all placed your book.
So
no, I've got to do a copy.
It's a beautiful,
I know, so well
placed.
Book
as well.
So well placed.
It's not just pretty; it's full of good things.
It is full of good things. Yes.
Well, I mean, pretty. Do you know what? Actually, I'm going to move somewhere right. I'm slightly bitty. I'm going to move in somewhere slightly stronger signal. Yes. Well, look, I will take no credit for the. Yeah, I will take no credit for the pretty. That is a very clever marketing department, I'm afraid. But yes, it was great fun to work on.
Yeah.
So if anyone's got any questions for Gareth, please do pop them in the comments. We will get through as many as we can, obviously, as always. Be kind. Doesn't sound like you guys. Be kind. Ish.
It's that hashtag be kind. We can
hashtag be kind.
Usually the accounts that say hashtag be kind, usually the ones, are going to be demented.
Yeah, exactly. Can we just say a quick thank you to Madeline? Who's
thank you, Madeline.
And Chrissy. Thank you very much.
Oh, hi, Chrissy.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sorry, yeah. So I love this. You put 500 years. It's a bit more than 500 years of history, isn't it? Because you're starting a little bit before the Tudors.
Yeah.
You mentioned Godiva.
Yeah, old saucy Godiva. It was her son who owned it. Godgifu, as she went by before she was rebranded with some Latin rebranding. Yeah, it was extraordinary. I mean, when I started this, I had a very well-meaning, kind gentleman who, because nothing's more soothing to an author when you get a note and you're halfway through a book writing it and someone says, please make sure you include this. But he said, please, don't just start with Henry VIII. Make sure you include the person who it really started with, which was Wolsey. I thought, well, actually, it really wasn't Wolsey. Wolsey is really important and gets his own. I think actually it's the longest chapter in the book, chapter 2. But chapter 1 is really about the people who were there before, and there's not enough on them to sustain a whole chapter. We kind of get to the start of the Tudors, and Henry VII is where the book really takes off. But as a manor, the house was it was a manor. There's a villa there under the Romans, and then it is taken over after the fall of Anglo-Saxon England in 1066. It's given to one of William the Conqueror's cousins, and they later rent it out to warrior monks of the Order of the Knights Hospitalier, who turn it into a kind of Airbnb. And they rent it out to very well-to-do people who want to be near the royals and want a nice country house. So some things never really changed. And Wolsey, in fact, rents it as the last tenant. He doesn't own it. He never owns Hampton Court. He's just given a really generous lease whereby he can basically expand it as much as he wants. So he takes the manor as the rental and turns it into the palace.
Yeah,
sorry, Kat. Yeah,
I kind of, in a weird way, I sort of want to come almost to the present day, because one of the first jobs I did as a costumed interpreter was playing one of the governesses who was a Grace and Favour resident who lived in the palace at the same time as the palace historian was there. And so we did a whole Edwardian Christmas. And I think we think about Hampton Court as this fabulously opulent Tudor and then Baroque palace. Right. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Grace and Favour, because things do. It's an odd location, isn't it?
Yeah, it's got this sort of, as you say, like the Tudor splendor and the Stuarts, and then this sort of fabulous Hanoverian Baroque era. But it also is just this compound of Victorian eccentricity that never really gets talked about. So I picked the chapter in the book is set in the summer of 1862, and it's told through one of the most impressive later residents, a mathematician called Michael Faraday, who I was just completely in awe of and was given a home there by Prince Albert. So really kind of, Albert had been an admirer of Faraday for a long time, but when Faraday had what we would now recognize as essentially a complete nervous breakdown, there was sort of a kind of work around with his admirers to do something that would ease this, and Prince Albert then steps in, and that's where Faraday ends up getting the Grace and Favour house. So Grace and Favour is a system whereby royalty will give accommodation in one of their properties to servants, courtiers, or people linked to that world who need a home. And generally, why it was extended to Hampton Court, one of the justifications of it was because it was no longer a royal palace. A parliamentary committee in 1842, early in Victoria's reign, decided that it would make more sense to parcel the interiors up into apartments, because then, in return for paying little or no rent, the people who got it would be responsible for the upkeep, and that would kind of keep the palace for the nation, but not at the nation's expense. And you have this cavalcade of incredibly mismatched people being sent there. So on the one hand, you have the Earl of Belfast's widow, Lady Honoria Anastasia Chichester, who is given somehow, Honoria Anastasia gets, sort of a palace within a palace. She gets like a wing for her and then for her servants. And she's constantly telling everyone else how fair the system is, but they've been given sort of a turret room that is never warm in winter and never cool in summer. So it's all quite off, but you have geniuses and tennis stars and widowed countesses, and they're all jockeying for favor. So yeah, it is a very, and then you've Sarah Grundy, the fabulous housekeeper who goes around lifting the artistic treasures because she thinks they're pornographic and anything with nudity in it a Christian shouldn't see, so she stores them in an attic at Hampton Court. So it's just absolutely fantastic, really, to that chapter. I have to say I loved writing because I got the plans, and then it's structured like Faraday's walk through the palace, and you see these just fabulously demented aristocrats and academics living together. And also, I think it was it was interesting to focus on Faraday, partly because it does remind you that Victorian Britain really did value genius in a way that I don't think it often gets credit to. I think mathematicians and engineers, it was fantastic. It was really, really an interesting chapter to do. And also, I think there is not that I'm saying it's a quiet period in Hampton Court's history, but it is this kind of period when it's sleeping between George III leaving it in 1760 and it really taking off later in Victoria's reign as this juggernaut tourist attraction.
Yeah. Actually, we do still see.
Sorry, go on. You carry on with that one.
I was just going to say we do still see traces of the grace and favour. If you go to Hampton Court now and stand in Clock Court, you will see this little bar with kind of spikes on the top, and that is because residents got fed up of people coming into their windows with box Brownings. So they put these kind of prevention measures around the windows because they were so fed up of people spying on them. It's just it got referred to as the quality poorhouse because it takes ages to get in like running water and electricity. So it's just
they do nothing.
It's cold. It's damp. It's miserable.
It's why they put Xenia Romanoff, Nicholas II's sister, it's why they put her in one of the houses in the grounds, because it's comfortable. To put her in there would have been kind of awful. She's the revolution's been stressful enough for her. So they put Ksenia or Xenia, how you want to pronounce it, into one of the houses, Wilderness House. And what was interesting was I had when I was working on the Queen Mother book, I had interviewed various people who are sort of from that world, and several of them had known people who lived in Hampton Court in the grace and favour system. And what's quite interesting, some of them were saying, like I went, I used to walk, like after dinner, we used to get drunk and run around on the roof. And you would see sort of people in their tails just barreling across the roof. But what happened in 1986 was a grace and favour resident fell asleep. Sorry, the story is it was a candle. It may have been a cigarette, but a fire swept through the palace, and the press, not for the first time when it came to royal matters, zoned in on a story, created a lot of public outrage. Hampton Court was, presented as this bastion of privileged dimwits, and how could this grace and favour system still be maintained? And as a result, the monarchy, and I don't think it should have done this, but bear in mind, in the 80s, this was the first time it was battling real tabloid intrusion, and they kind of caved in a lot of things that they shouldn't, I think. And they caved in the grace and favour system. And so when a grace and favour resident dies now at Hampton Court, they're not replaced. And so you have wings of the palace that are just cold and damp and empty. And the thing is, there is no need for these rooms to be open to the public because they're not of massive historical interest. And you physically can't tour every nook and cranny. So actually, the grace and favour system did a brilliant thing for Hampton Court. It kept it dry. It kept it lived in and warm. And actually, I think the fact that the grace and favour system is kind of dying in front of us and dwindling away. And I was taken into one that had just been vacated, and it was sort of, it was just quietly heartbreaking. There was just one bottle of Cointreau, a copy of Country Life, and that was it. And I thought, you know what, thus passes all the glory of the world sort of stuff. And I also think it's one of those cases where, who does it benefit that Hampton Court is now empty? No one. So it was just, I think that did real damage to it. So there's the grace and favour system, certainly does continue in other much smaller, more modern properties. But absolutely, there is no question that it is being retired in front of us in Hampton Court. So yes, there are. Sorry, someone said it still does. Politicians still have grace and favour residences. That's not totally what the grace and favour system is. It tends to be more when you retire from public life or royal service. Angela Kelly got one. The late Queen's dresser got one. But they're not put into these places like Hampton Court anymore. And actually, I think that's probably long term for the architecture of the palace a bit of a shame, unless they can think of something else to do with it. But it's a colossal task.
Whatever they do needs to.
That's a great point.
Cover cost of keeping it going, though? That seems social.
Yeah,
I imagine it was this around about the same time as the Royal Yacht was decommissioned and that kind of thing as well.
It's the same principle that it was sort of presented. It was why in the same way Hampton Court and Britannia could be spun from a very anti-royal PR perspective. It didn't necessarily factor in the more complex, soft nature of how these things can function. But certainly the grace and favour, to Kat's point, the high point of the grace and favour systems in the Victorian and Edwardian era are fascinating because they're kind of a study in a commune. And it's fascinating.
We've got some questions coming in, haven't we?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with this one from Nathaniel, because I think my favourite chapter was probably the one about James in the Bible, although I have a bit about Cromwell that massively amused me, which I'll come to if we get the time. So the question from Nathaniel is, my question is for Gareth, as he talks about James I being at Hampton Court Palace and enjoying many a twink there. Has he and the rest of you girls watched the trailer for the new show Mary and George? I didn't know
the new show. No, I never.
Yeah, no, it's Julianne Moore is playing George Villiers' mother, and Nicholas Galitzin is playing George Villiers. And yeah, it shows quite graphically James I and Buckingham having a buggery good time. Yeah, I have watched. I'm really excited that there's going to be something set at the Jacobean Court, partly because I'm currently, my next book is A Private Life of James I, so it will be that's due in spring. So I love the Jacobean Court, and I think my instinct is, for what it's worth, it's the next thing. I think it's going to be the next big thing in pop culture, Nathaniel. So yeah, I think Mary and George will absolutely play a part of that. I think it's based on a book that I actually once gave quite a tough review to in the Daily Telegraph. I think it's based on that. But anyway, fabulous cast, and I think attention on the Stuarts is always a good thing. And yeah, actually, I mean, probably to Catherine's point, I did love, I mean, I've written about the Tudors before, but my favorite section was the Stuarts. It really, really was. I loved writing it. I've said this to Philippa sort of when we've been on tour together. It was by far and away the one that captured me the most. And the fact that also so much obscuring of stuff has gone on. I mean, there's a bit where, people have sort of said that there's an argument about was James not intimate with these men. There are letters where he explicitly mentions entering them. Like it's not kind of ambiguous at all.
Question.
No, like it's not. They're not just bros. So yeah, it was. It was fabulously interesting, but also, yeah, you go from these parties, and then he's commissioning the Bible, and he certainly was also a great heavyweight intellectually. He's a fascinating. I mean, one of the things I've learned writing this book in his private life is that he was fascinating, and he was so complex, and not kind of this slobbering, slightly creepy, pervy man. He's often, there was a lot of neuroses there, absolutely. But yeah, I'm so glad, Catherine, you enjoyed the chapter in the Bible, because that to me was really, I mean, I love church history and I love theology and philosophy as well. So that was something I loved writing.
Verena asks, sorry if that's how I hope that's how you pronounce it. Who is your favourite inhabitant of Hampton Court? That's what prompted me to say, how many people live there? It sounds like there must have been thousands and thousands of people live there over the years.
It depends what do you mean by favourite? I suppose if you're saying it in terms of someone who I just genuinely like, it's probably Grand Duchess Ksenia Nicholas II's sister. There's something about that, the fragility of that, of her in her old age, and you do feel kind of protective and sorry for her as history has just swept everything from her. And she was the last royal death at Hampton Court in 1960. I mean, it's hard to sort of, I had a lot of fondness for Lord Harvey, as well, Queen Caroline's favorite. Even though he's the opposite scale, because objectively, like a monster. but just the most enormous amount of fun to write about. And his memoirs are a dream. They're sort of like Evelyn Waugh meets Noel Coward meets Oscar Wilde before their time. He was just sort of bisexual and bitchy and bed hopping and, you know, possibly bulimic and definitely was on drugs. And, you know, someone's like, oh, how on earth do you leave that party at 4 a.m. and then write an incredibly cogent assessment of the excise bill legislation? I wonder what happened. You know, so he's definitely taking something. But also just, again, a kaleidoscope of contradictions. So probably in terms of actually liking someone, Grand Duchess Ksenia, and in terms of favorite to write about, it's probably Lord Hervey, Queen Caroline's favorite and a great memoirist of court life in the 1730s.
Because I suppose writing the book like this, somebody put a question further up, and it was quite a lot further up, so I'm sorry, whoever it was, about how do you take a subject that's oft been covered and make it a little bit different and make it something new, which is obviously what you've done here, because the way you've approached it is taking it through time chronologically, but from these different perspectives and the different stories within these people's lives. But there's characters, I don't like the word characters, but you know what I mean, people that we recognize, like Henry and Wolsey and things like that. But it's allowed you to get these little nuances of all these other people, and that really gives us a much broader scope of the things that went on behind the walls, because it's so easy to just focus on these big major players all the time, because that's what people are interested in. They want to hear about Wolsey, they want to hear about Henry and all these types of things, but there's so much. So what you've presented is a real way to uncover this myriad of personalities and what they bring to the story individually, and that makes it really fun and quite sad sometimes as well. Some of the stories are really touching and quite moving.
Well, I think part of it is that, you know, there really hasn't been a massive popular history of Hampton Court since Victoria's time. I mean, it was just quite surprising. There hasn't been a really solid popular history of it. But yeah, that is very much it, in that, you know, you see the Anne Boleyn you see here is sort of at the height of her glory, and she's a patron of architecture. That's not usually the Anne you see. And that kind of follows the whole way through it, that you see a very sick Elizabeth I. And that sort of continues, that you see these people at very particular moments in their career, and it's not always the moment that you see everywhere else. So, and it was never intended to be kind of potted biographies of these people. It was them at a moment, and that was really the way to try and tell a story, not just of Hampton Court, but also really of the monarchy and of Britain itself through these people, which is why it's an English palace, but it's a British history. So you have, you know, people like Barnaby Fitzpatrick, who was Irish, plays a major part in it. Then the Scots play a major part at the start of the Stuart, the Stuart court. You know, it really was important to sort of tell the totality of that. So yes, I enjoyed that part of it as well.
It is incredible how many stories of national importance have a link to Hampton Court.
Yeah. And I think, I suppose for me, a lot of the stuff about the Civil War, you know, it kind of was the royalist response to the Civil War. It was sort of birthed and buried in Hampton Court. The royals flee there in 1642, just in the outbreak of the war. And really that flight from London is kind of, I think, is more significant than the raising of the standard of Charles I. I think when they evacuate out of London to escape the unrest, and they don't come back. I mean, Charles I, the next time he's back in London, is as a prisoner. And he then is brought back at the end of the wars that started as a prisoner to Hampton Court. And the second one's, you know, there's so much that happens in that Stuart period. And you're right, of real national significance.
It's really quite overwhelming. When you stop and you examine it like that, it's hard to think how much history is squashed. I mean, Hampton itself is not a small place, obviously, but in terms of the scale of everything, I find it really hard to comprehend how much has gone on there. And we've all talked before about how where you go to a physical location, when you're in there, you're trying to absorb, you know, these people were here, these events happened here, and that can be quite hard to take in on its own. So having read your book and the discussion we're having now, I think you really do feel the enormity of its impact and what it's seen, and I find it quite hard to sort of put that into words or to encompass it, you know, as you have done. And I think it's really it's really quite overwhelming, actually.
Well, like a lot of stuff had to go. I mean, really, the book when it was originally pitched was a lot longer. And there were stories that got dropped along the way, not because they were too scandalous or that they didn't fit. And the book has to be, it's not an exhaustive history of Hampton Court. It has to tell this arc. And I think it also is a good reminder for all of us that these palaces were towns, they were cities in their heyday, and they contained the totality of the social experience. So that's why chapter 1 focuses mostly on the kitchens, and there's ladies in waiting is the focus in chapter 4. You have midwives and page boys and the chocolatiers. They all get covered in lamplighters, because you have to really show that the palace is upstairs and downstairs as much as it is sort of laterally historically significant.
Amazing. Before we go on to the next question, can I just say a big thank you to John?
Oh, John,
Thank
great
you so
pun.
much.
Love it. Thank you very much. For superb pun. Well done, John.
Referring to Gareth to the book on the Queen Mother, which is also
excellent.
incredibly
Thank you, John.
good read. All right, so look, some people have been asking questions.
Tori, I'm very pleased to know that your nephew's better. That's very good news. Tori's nephew had typhoid, so I'm very pleased to know that Tori's nephew is better. Thank you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so Jackie asks, are any parts of the structure original or very old?
Yeah, nearly all of them. It depends what you mean by original. So there's nothing left of the medieval manor that is gone. The earliest surviving principal structure is the kitchens, which date predominantly from the reign of Henry VII, when the house was rented by his Lord Chamberlain, a guy called Lord Daubeny, Lord Daubeny had sort of got onto the Tudor side really early because he had backed a plot against Richard III. Who, as from recent revelations, never did anything bad and wished harm to no man. But Lord Daubeny, children don't die in Christian countries, I think was one of the arguments.
They're never executed or killed.
No, absolutely
never happened.
Yes, Lord Daubeny kind of gets on side with the Tudors really early, Jackie, and he flees because he backs this plot against Richard III. Richard III gets wind of it, and Daubeny flees across the Channel. So actually, he's really well positioned because he's kind of at the future Henry VII side before it really takes off. So when the Tudors do win the day in 1485, Daubeny rises very quickly with them and has a substantial amount of land granted to him, and he uses some of that to rent Hampton Court and build these fabulous new kitchens. A large amount of it is from Henry VIII's period. So things like the Great Hall are original, the Great Watching Chamber, the Haunted Gallery said to be haunted by Catherine Howard's ghost. The chapel is original, though it's been redecorated by Queen Anne in the 18th century, and the Privy Council chamber. Then you have now the Anne Boleyn wing, for want of a better term, is gone. It was demolished in the 1680s, partly because it wasn't in very good structural repair. So that's the public wing is old Tudor. The private wing is old Georgian and Baroque. So I mean, and actually I've spoken to some people who work there, and I'm like the only one that likes that wing of the palace. They all sort of wish it was still Tudor, and I mean, a cherub and a chandelier, and I'm anyone's. So I love sort of the fantastically overdone Georgian rooms. So take your time and go around those. It's wonderful. But yes, there has been very little done to it, and it still is on the blueprint of what they would have known.
That was one of the things that you mentioned. I think we've got a bit of a delay. Sorry, Kat. One of the things you mentioned in the book was, we do go, oh no, what we've lost. And I know Kat like that, but Philip and I too, we've mentioned that we actually really love to see that difference and how beautiful it looks. But when you talked in the book about all the places that were lost and all the things that had happened in the pieces of the palace that were lost in that change, and you're a bit like, oh, that is a bit sad. actually.
Yeah, no, look, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. There, the rooms for Catherine. I mean, I remember when I was working in Young and Downton Fair, I thought, oh my goodness, like the rooms where her downfall began are gone. But yeah, so I think, yes, it is sad. However, William didn't just tear it down for no reason. It was in very bad structural repair, as most of Henry VIII's constructions were. They were built too quickly. And whereas Wolsey's stuff was more so that he wasn't in as much of a rush. The kind of the core of the Tudor wing that was Wolsey's was really done between 1515 and 1522. And the core of that wing was done between 1536 and 1539. It's not the same thing. So it's just and so it's also interesting. Sorry, Mary II, who authorized a lot of the demolition, when she saw it in 1689, she did say it's been very badly neglected, and part of that was because Charles II stopped living there for a period of time because he'd let his ex-mistress live there. So from that, there also spiraled, more awkward moments and therefore more architectural neglect. And so, but they kind of didn't have a choice. That being said, it is a very good thing that William III ran out of money, because he would have kept going. He kind of got a taste for it. And had William not run out of money, the whole Tudor wing, bar the Great Hall, would have gone. And then that would have been tragic. But from my perspective, having a building that starts with a medieval kitchen, moves through the Tudor period, and then reaches the Baroque period is a gift. It's extraordinary.
I absolutely agree. And when I lead education sessions and I take groups and I make them stand in Clock Court, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't think of anywhere else in the country, maybe even in the world, where you are going to find, because we have marked out on the floor in brickwork the footprint of what we know of Daubney's house. We then have Wolsey's terracotta crest on the wall. We've got Henry's 1540-ish clock, the Great Hall, Wren's colonnade, and then we've got this weird mock Tudor Georgian facade on top of Wolsey's royal bedchambers. And the fact that you can stand there in that nexus of archaeological and architectural time, just abutting each other, that happens nowhere else. Nowhere else.
No, it doesn't. Partly because you have a lot of the other palaces, they just don't survive. They are either like Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace, very much off a time. And they're kind of built in one go, more or less. And that's not to say there haven't been changes, of course, but they are at their core a singular building project. Whereas, and then the other ones, Richmond, Greenwich, Nonsuch, they are gone. They didn't stand the test of time for a variety of reasons. Oatland's the same. What you really only, or like Windsor, they have periods where they're not really used, and then they're kind of revamped in one go. Essentially the interior of Windsor Castle is George IV's. So when you are looking at Hampton Court, you actually have, as you say, this nexus of contributions architecturally that is then, I think, matched by the nexus of people who have lived there of importance across the centuries or interest.
Sorry, I'm losing questions. Pretty Pig asks, were there any facts, stories, anecdotes you really that you wanted to include but couldn't in the book?
No, there were none that I really wanted to and didn't. There were ones that I sort of semi-reluctantly culled just because their points have been covered in other ones. And really, actually, I had a professor of French history at university, and this quote has come back to me where he said, really, he asked what caused the French Revolution, and he said, you'll know you understand it when you can either answer that question in a book or a sentence. And he said that the key to historical confidence is when you know what to leave out and what isn't relevant, as opposed to what is. And so actually, I sort of took it as hopefully a mark I was becoming more confident when I thought, well, the story about the Earl of Tyrone in the late Elizabethan period is interesting to me, but it's not relevant. And the story of Henry VII's visit in October 1500 was interesting. I did it as a podcast episode in my podcast, but I had a chapter in Elizabeth of York, so you didn't need to from the early Tudor period. But all the stories I really wanted to tell, they are in the book.
Awesome.
That's
So
good to know.
what you're saying is, as a good historian, you shouldn't only include the things you think are interesting and write about the things you'd like to find yourself. Is that what you're saying, Gareth?
Well, I think you have. I mean, yes and no. Partly,
being a bit rude about what's happening.
No. I think sometimes you can spot historians who just want to lecture people, and I have found this out, and therefore I'm going to talk about it ad nauseum. And you think this is stultifying, it's stultifying. And there's a place for boring conversation, there is, but don't expect people to want to part with their money and their time for it. Like, if you want to be incredibly pedantic, accept being incredibly niche. So I think sometimes when I used to do sort of theatre back in the day, I remember a director saying, people are giving up their time and their money for you, and you really should not take that lightly at all. So I always think information is important, but you also have to entertain. And what I mean by that is not kind of the razzle dazzle, but also being really respectful of the fact that people, life is tough, and people sometimes come to these books to be properly intellectually entertained. So I always try to tell a good history, with the emphasis on the story as well.
Yeah,
well, and you do one you always tell to again and again and again, isn't it? You'll read it 10 times, 20 times. You'll tell your friends, and I think that's the difference. Is people will come back. I've come back and I've reread bits of it already, like the chapter on James, because I read that once and I was like, I need to read that again.
Thank you. That's immensely kind. Thank you very much.
In fact, I took it to the sauna, and I sat with it. And I came, David said, did you have a nice time? I went, I just read the most amazing. I'm sorry I was so long, but I had to read it again.
Yeah, the James chapter is a chunky one. Yeah, absolutely.
What was it about? So I told him, and he was like, oh, right. Not everyone's bag, to be fair. But I was. He said, oh, I thought you would go all winkly with that. I said, no, most of the time I was just sat next to the pool. With the dog.
I thought you were actually into the steam room. I was like, my goodness, that's
cool. Yeah, I was thinking that. Liz, for me, it reads like a love letter to the palace, which I approve of.
I did fall in love with it.
I love that place. It deserves to be romanced, and you've taken it out for dinner. And you've brought in a lovely dinner, and it's had a nice evening.
I will leave what happened afterwards. Yeah. I actually, it was, and we were set up at first, Kat, and I wasn't keen on the date. It was someone was like, you really got to meet this girl, Hampton Court. Why was a girl? And buried, and I wasn't initially, when we were talking about the idea, I wasn't totally sold on it, and then as soon as I started the research, I very much fell completely in love.
I just wanted to ask this one quickly, because did you mention that there are still people in the grace and favour?
So there are, but no royals. So to Liz's question, the last royal resident at all was a Romanov Grand Duchess called Grand Duchess Ksenia. You can also pronounce it Xenia Romanov, who was Nicholas II's sister. And the last royal, resident, kind of sovereign monarch to reside there was technically George II, who died in 1760. And the reason his grandson and successor George III turned against it was that he had a very difficult time there. His grandfather we would now categorize him as physically abusive to George III. And according to the sixth of George III's 9 sons, a man called Prince Augustus Frederick, the Duke of Sussex, his father later told him that the reason he hated Hampton Court and stopped it being a royal residence and started the grace and favour system there was that his grandfather had one day beaten him so severely for some minor infraction that he never really got over the injustice and horror of that day. So so George II or George III, depending on what way you want to do it, but it's either George III, and the last total royal resident was Xenia Romanov, who died there in 1960.
You see, that just shows though how when I say small incident, I don't mean small as in undermining.
Of course, yes, yeah.
But just one small incident, which is in the grand scheme of things that were meant to happen in that sort of environment, changed the course of history for it.
Yeah. So but that was one of the stories, Catherine, that I expected to be disproved. I call them the Marie Antoinette's cake moment, where you hear it so often. You have your bing, 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 your radar going of like, this is a bullshit historical anecdote that gets trotted out all the time. I was really convinced that the idea that this one incident had been the nail in the coffin for Hampton Court wouldn't be true, and it is. And I have to say, I mean, Kat can talk to this probably, but even better than I would say, certainly better than I can. That having done so much work in Caroline of Ansbach, but it was quite. I start every stage in history of trying to like someone, and usually they will tell you who they are quite quickly. And I think a lot of people go in the other way. It's better to try to like them and let them prove that they're not. And George II showed who he was quite quickly. And I'm not saying that he was an kind of a towering figure of evil, but he was such a thoroughly unpleasant man and often just horrible to his family. And I felt great, and that's sort of to go back to Catherine's earlier point. When you see him in the first chapter in the Georgian section of this, he's a young man who is still grieving the fact that his father has imprisoned his mother. But when you come back, you see him as a man who really is being propped up. I think, he is someone whose greatest asset by a country mile is his wife. It is Queen Caroline. And I think then by the time you see him again, he is a monstrous father and grandfather to Prince Frederick and to Prince George III. So George II was someone who I think was very, very difficult to like.
Yeah. And of course, Hampton Court is also the scene of that real rift between Frederick and his parents. That kind of rushing her out to give birth.
And it was interesting, Kat, because it was really at the time I was writing this, the current Duke and Duchess of Sussex saga was playing out. And it was quite Lord Harvey's comments on the Prince Frederick versus the George II thing could have been written about this. I mean, when he says, it's outrageous, like he's talking about Frederick, and he says, he says he wants to be reconciled with the royal family, but only if they admit that they're completely in the wrong and he did nothing wrong. And it was really interesting. And then you sort of sometimes, I mean, I was doing commentary on it, but for work, but I had to turn the television off for a while because you have to be careful of modern parallels seeping into the language. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think there is something to be said about it's never going to be normal when the family business is monarchy, because you've got the Tudors who are just so desperate to produce male heirs, and there is an inherent problem with doing so. But you have the heir and the spare, or countless sons, and they just seem to hate each other. You have a proliferation of children, and they don't like each other.
Yeah. Well, what's really remarkable though about the Stuarts, who in many ways are a disaster in monarchy, that they are the royal family that dynamic does not happen with. Actually the siblings all get on really well and they're all quite close. But then the slightly more, the Hanoverians, who are just epically dysfunctional privately, are a very successful dynasty.
Here's my take on it, is that actually in a rise of republicanism, the split of the Sussexes might be the thing that saves the monarchy, because Republicans have a place to put to kind of team up with a royal, and monarchists have it's the Georgians.
They also
Brighton Pavilion all over again.
Well, they have in Catherine, the Princess of Wales, they have basically what she has been clothed in through her own designer. I would suspect actually probably not. She will be presented. She's been given the attributes of the late Queen Mother, who was the most spectacular marathon walker in monarchical history. You just keep going, because all of a sudden Catherine can now look very much like the person who will keep the firm going and will uphold a more traditional view of monarchy. And that gives royalists something to really gather around. And also, you will never have anyone more loyal to, or more protective of you when you're being attacked. So actually, in many ways, all of the things that happened, you know, against William and Catherine, ironically, I think long term will probably help them.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong. I don't think I am, but I think I you know, that I think that's what will happen.
JT says the way you describe the palace, and it's really, I think it means, and in its design, it seems all over the place. Does it get confusing? Did it get confusing when you were trying to? I suppose you've got two books as well that have. You've got the palace, and then you've got Young and Damned there, where you were looking at especially the rooms that aren't there anymore. How
it doesn't. It doesn't. So where it doesn't is when I tell you, JT, you cannot miss where the two halves collide. Like, I mean, it is. You step from a 16th century gallery into a clearly 18th century, 18th century decorated, colossal Baroque. I mean, it's so obvious. Where it does, it's a pretty pick. I'm gonna just have to completely disagree. First of all, King Charles III, not Chuck, is the monarchy's approval ratings have actually climbed up in Australia and New Zealand since he's become king, and they're holding very strong here. So at the minute, we're yeah, it does all come back to him, but I think broadwise, I mean, I suppose you can probably speak more to the English audience, but I think it is that so far I haven't seen any dip in the support for the monarchy substantially since Elizabeth II's death. At least the polls don't seem to be indicating that. I think definitely a support for it.
Either way, to be fair,
yeah.
No one really considered it.
There is definitely, though, I think there's definitely an appetite for change. What that change is, though, is where the polls start to become so. That's an American. Okay. So the way you describe the places, yes. So where it gets confusing, JT, is when you start to go into, I think, Kat, you'll know this better than I will. When you start to go into the Baroque wing, I find it slightly more confusing in the kind of the private rooms that merge with. So, JT, in the Baroque room, there's kind of two areas at play. There's the William III initial blueprint, and then there's the stuff that the Hanoverians put in, slightly more private, intimate rooms. And I know this. This sounds like I'm paranoid. I'm convinced they move at night. Like sometimes the Queen Caroline rooms just feel like they're in a different part of the palace, so they become slightly more Warren-like, I think. That's where it can become confusing. But in terms of the really broad sweep, no, it's not confusing. In terms of the details inside, yes, I find the Tudor wing easier to navigate people around, partly because it's less. They just did bigger rooms. They just do a lot bigger rooms with broader functions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. If you asked me to tell you to direct you to the Montaigne portrait paintings, I would not be able to do it. For if you stood me in Clock Court and where's the grapevine, I'd be like,
to see it, you must.
It's the orientation, isn't it? It's sort of when you are inside, and you have to look out the window. You're like, I'm there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's also one of the things that the palace was really interesting with is that you kind of see this collision. It's not just architecture; it's also the collision of styles, and how we refer to people changes over time. So one of the things I was very conscious of is I just personally am always very, particularly if it's not my own country, I try to be very respectful of how I refer to other leaders, other titles, things like that. And so I was conscious of trying to make sure we got in the original spelling of Stuart and used, King of Scots rather than King of Scotland, and used the proper American titles and Yugoslavian and things. And you really get, what shocked me was the way in which things that we think are eternal have shifted and moved in terms of etiquette and style over the centuries. It was really, really astonishing. And then it just all feeds into this idea that the palace is an arc of so much change.
Amanda says,
I mean, like arguably,
bathrooms, definitely the bathroom.
Yeah, but here's the thing: exits and bathrooms close depending on what's happening. So sometimes you can only go out some ways, and sometimes you can only go out other ways. So you have to. It's never the same 2 days in a row.
Never.
But in terms of if it gets confusing, Gareth, you don't know this about me. I have no sense of direction. I'm not making this up. In more than one place I've lived, I've got lost in my own house.
Easily done.
So the pain of trying to navigate myself, I somewhere like Hampton Court, I cannot go on my own.
Because the thing is as well, when she's using a sat nav, she's also such a bad omen for tech that she literally gets lost. She started off at my house.
That soothes me a little bit. That tech can still be defeated by human foibles. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, she didn't stop for a wee, and then it tried to send her home. But she was on her way to live.
Yeah, it's back in Leicestershire again, which is never good news for anyone ever.
Incredible.
So, but I cannot navigate Hampton Court. I can't. I can't. It's like the comedy of me trying to get somewhere on the tube. People go, "Oh, you'll be fine."
I just about get used to it, and then we're very lucky when we go on tour. We get to go on into like some of the secret places and stuff, and then I'm lost all over again. It's like, so we're where? Yeah, it is. But it's so much. I think it's so interesting.
I think though, like when you're talking, Gareth, about how much sort of stuff and how much things have changed throughout the history of the palace. It's what is amazing to me is the things that this palace has been a stage for. I mean, I think arguably you could call Hampton Court Palace the cradle of the Reformation. The Chapel Royal of Hampton Court Palace, the fact that is where Edward is baptized, for me, there's a big argument there that it is the cradle of the Reformation.
I do. I think it's the burial place of the divine right of kings. That whole notion that Anne Boleyn really pushed and championed, and Charles I gave up his life for. It is William III who says the monarchy is not based on that. It is no longer based on that.
Yeah. Also you've got Ollie Cromwell in there putting his potters up for the weekend.
It is absolutely. I mean, its history in English and British republicanism is absolutely extraordinary. To some extent, it's the White House of this Puritan republic that exists between, say, 1653 and 1658. It is a Cromwellian hub, and he was absolutely fascinating because in many ways, I find Oliver Cromwell, broadly speaking, repellent. But I did, at the same time, I often think it's a mistake to believe that people who do monstrous things seem like monsters. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. I know his daughter died there, and it is heartbreaking when he's just completely devastated by what is happening in front of him. At the same time, he didn't stop him bereaving families in Drogheda when he laid siege to it. So it really. Why do I find Cromwell? Tori Nightingale says that's why do I find Cromwell repellent? Because I still live in the shadow of what he did in Ireland. Every one of my ancestors does. This is a man who, in the Civil War era, invaded because there was an alliance between Irish Royalists and the Irish Catholic Confederation. And he did not accept that Ireland had a right to continue to support the monarchy after he had abolished it in England. And he laid siege to 12 towns, the most notorious of which is Drogheda, which is chronicled in the book. What I did not realize, and he does, by his own admission, he goes beyond the standard rules of war. He slaughters people in a church. They continue executions after the surrender. But what I did not know was that he then embarked upon a resettlement program, which is why, if you ask, I'm not overly blown away by Charles I in this book either. I don't think he emerges in the palace very well, but I do not accept that Charles I versus Cromwell were comparable in how they ruled Ireland, because Cromwell decided to punish. He allegedly said to hell or to Connaught. Connaught's the poorest part of Ireland. He forcibly changed 2/3 of land ownership in Ireland because they might one day support the monarchy. He sent 12,000 people to slavery out of Ireland. It was it was just something that really shocked me, because when I saw the maps that they used, and you kind of start looking at how much land changes ownership. I think what Cromwell did that to me ultimately is repellent is that he turned the possibility that you might have a political belief he didn't agree to into justification for taking land off you. And yet at the same time, it was also very important for me to include in the book that this is the man who re-legalized Judaism in England. You know, that was an extraordinarily wonderful thing he did, but he also did something in Ireland that sowed seeds that no generation in Ireland has escaped from yet. So it really was, but someone's asked, how do you keep your emotions in check? Well, sometimes you don't. And sometimes you let yourself have a good grief for this loss, and then you just tell the story. And if you're doing your job right, sometimes you will find things about them that upset your own view of them, if that makes sense. So yeah, Paige, sorry, excuse me, that was you who asked the question. Yes, sometimes it's important to include things like him grieving his daughter, and him re-legalizing Judaism, and him extending religious toleration to every group in England, bar Catholics and Quakers, which by the way is not an insignificant detail, but it certainly was a lot further than any of his predecessors had done. So you try to weigh that up. But yeah, sometimes you did wonder what this island might have been had he not done what he did, or if Charles II had the courage to rescind it, the restoration of the monarchy. But by that point, it probably had gone on too long. But yeah, the ghost of Cromwell still. There's sort of a dark joke in Ireland that he's the only man who's ever united Ireland, because Catholics hate him for killing so many Catholics and Protestants hate him for killing a king. So it sort of brings everyone together.
I absolutely hate him. But I have to say, one of my favourite parts that just encompasses how joyful this man is they're talking about the wedding of his favourite daughter. And the Great Hall hosted the celebrations after their daughter Mary's wedding in the chapel. Blah, blah, blah. The festivals included a spoken masque devoid of music or set, during which Cromwell read aloud Latin verses in praise of godly government. What a riot.
Yeah, why don't you find that fun? Yeah, actually, Pretty Pics just said a comment, sometimes being unemotional is even more biased than being emotional. Yeah, there is an attempt at sometimes when it's something horrible, if you try to kind of there's also, to that point, there's something that drives me slightly batty when people say, well, it was just the standard at the time. You're assuming that everyone in the past was a sociopath. Everyone in the past was a sociopath. They aren't. There are. That's why I included comments from a lot of royalists, royalist journalists, and a royalist aristocrat in Ireland called the Marquis of Ormond, and also Cromwell's own letters, where they all say what he's done has gone beyond the standards of the 17th century. So it's a mistake, I think, also to assume that people in the past weren't repulsed by this. The reason, for instance, under Mary I or some of her predecessors, the reason why you burn people to death publicly is because flames hurt as much in 1555 as they do in 2023. You are doing it to terrify people. It's not that they're used to it. They're accepting of it. That's not the same thing. So
yeah.
Like that. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left.
Sure.
So maybe we could do one question, then we'll tell everyone, because you might have some people who might come and see you in your next little jaunt. That we'll talk about that before you go.
Yeah.
But was there, or what's the one, you'll have to pick one because we haven't got time to go through any more, most surprising thing you found out about?
The most surprising thing is that the coffin of the unknown warrior is made from an oak tree from Hampton Court. King George V in 1920 specifically stated he wanted the unknown warrior from the First World War buried in wood from Hampton Court and with a crusader's sword on top of the coffin. So the link to Hampton Court, the link to wider British history and to the unknown warrior is extraordinary. And then I think right after finishing it, the next time I saw it was with you, Philippa, at Westminster Abbey, and that kind of was like a punch in the chest. So yeah, that was the most surprising.
That's amazing.
So we are going to finish on time because you are off to America tomorrow.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell people what you're
off the pond, over the pond?
Yes. across the pond, back to beloved New York. So yeah, I'll be doing, actually at this stage it's mostly media appearance. Oh, John, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. I am doing, it's mostly media appearances. If there are any sort of big bookstore signings, I will post them up. But at the minute, it's bookstores. So it is media appearances in New York for the release of The Palace, which is available for pre-order now and is out in America in December 5th. And I think I will be doing some signings in New York, but I will keep you posted.
So you can follow you on Instagram. What's your handle on Instagram? I use it so much.
It is _ Gareth Russell. And yeah, that's probably where most of the information will be, because it's the world we live in.
Okay.
And everyone, thank you so much for all your questions and comments. That's just sorry, Liz. No, I don't. It as I say, it's pretty much all media in America, but I will certainly post them on Instagram.
And that's great that it's been released at the start of December in America, because that means whether you're in the States or in the UK, this. If you've got a historian in your life, they need this. If they haven't already got it, which they should, they need it for Christmas. This is a Christmas present right here. Yeah, give it to them.
Very good.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind. So kind.
Yeah, fabulous. And also, you mentioned your podcast, which is very, very worth a listen.
Yeah,
Single Malt History. Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's so kind. And thank you so much, everyone, for your questions and comments. It's been so enjoyable.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on your tour.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for coming down for this filth circus. We've been, to be fair, we've been quite dated. Surprisingly, Gareth, you brought out the best in us, which is, I thought it was going to get really filthy.
Yes,
before we quickly finish,
I thought Charles
what's your dirtiest story? What's your dirtiest story? Before we go, come on, let's filth this up a bit. What's your smuff story?
It's probably either Buckingham, James telling Buckingham he can't wait to pin his knees up to his chest again, or it is
Andy. Good for him.
I mean, you want a joke, you're going to have to learn to bend for Buckingham, and
there we are.
And fight for the peerage. Yeah, I also think generally a lot of the stuff about Barbara Villiers in chapter 16 is, actually it's not the smutty story, but Nell Gwynn feeding candied laxative to a rival royal mistress is probably my favorite overall story, saying, "Don't worry, hon, we're friends. By the way, have some sweets." I won't, but you have them. Yeah, shit happens. Yeah,
I'm watching my figure. Off you go. Love it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Good question. Nice question to sign. I don't know. I like it.
Fabulous. Well, I suppose we should let you go, really, but that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Gareth.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
Have a wonderful time in the States. I'm not jealous.
Oh no, a pretty picture said a real Regina George movie. Correct. That's exactly it. They were her Caltine bars.
And we've got. What do we need to say?
Yes,
let's do our thing.
What's happening next week?
I guess we should do this. We've got Julian. We've got Julian coming next week.
We have.
Ooh.
Julian Humphreys is on.
We have to besiege a castle, or any questions about battlefields or random stuff he's done A to Z's on. Like we did the A to Z of toilets with him last time.
I think it was toilets, yeah.
Yeah. Then he's just up for anything inappropriate that anyone can bring to him. His words, not mine.
Within reason. Within reason, but
I'm up for it.
We do an episode of Think It's Royal.
I was like, yeah, be careful how out loud you say that. But,
find out. Bring your outrageous questions for Julian. Let's see if we can get him to answer.
Let's see if we can blush. Let's see if we can do it. Please do make sure that you are subscribed, that you've hit the bell icon, that you've selected all in the drop down that will appear. That will allegedly tell you when we are next going live. Although YouTube is a sneaky minx, so it's always worth following us over on the Instagram of History After Dark, because we will be posting when we are going live as well. Although we are only going live on the YouTube. Make sure you're following us. If you want to come over and be one of our close friends, we frequently post some filth on our stories there. So
that makes no sense and probably isn't relevant to history. Sorry, not sorry.
You can do that. Please make sure you've liked this Share it with your mates. Let them know it's a good time. Occasionally it's dirtier than this. Sometimes it's less dirty. We've got a Substack.
We have.
Haven't we?
We have. I've got to buy me a coffee on there at the moment. I don't even know if I might have deleted that.
History.com.
Anyway,
historyofthedog.substack.com. And we've also got a buy me a coffee where you can buy us a Winnebago so we can torment Catherine. That's www.buymeacoffee.com/had podcast.
I went just quickly. I met my friends from uni on Sunday. We went for a lunch, and we hadn't seen each other for years. And one of them said to me, "Oh, my teenage daughter was watching History After Dark," and I was like, "Oh." And then she started taking this out of me for not liking tea, and I had to explain to everybody else my issue with Winnebagos. And
there you go, it's face.
There's something wrong with me.
Exactly. When she told us, we were like, "Well, that
Gareth." When I tell you, it's really hard sometimes. It's difficult dealing with this. I've got to work with it.
Look, I mean, Catherine, absolutely fine to be friends, but I would not want any of her relatives marrying.
I wouldn't marry me, to be fair. Look, what it is.
I would imagine not.
You get in it one place and you go to sleep and you wake up and your son starts.
She thinks someone's going to drive her while she's asleep. And we were like, well, we weren't going to, but now you've said it.
No, I have told you people, you park it up and I am going to the Premier Inn. You can knock yourselves out and do what you like, but I am not sleeping in that thing.
Drive off.
I don't care how fancy it is. And then you will not be forcing me to eat cucumbers, sausage rolls and drink tea.
Face is brilliant. She finds any cucumber in a sandwich, her face is fantastic. Yeah.
It's a good time. Yeah. It's a good time.
Anyway, we really should let you go and pack.
Yeah, I should go
pack. Let's have you back for your next one. Let's have you back when you want to talk about James's privates.
Yeah, absolutely.
And his pinning capabilities.
Yeah.
I'm not even sorry.
No, I love it. There has to be kind of a drag queen, like Divine Right of Kings, something. I'll come up with it. I'll get there.
That is the sales pitch.
Yeah.
It's right there. You've got it.
It's called the Divine Right, not the Divine Wrong. Something like that. I'll get there. I will get it.
Love it.
But yes, please come back. That would be fabulous.
Please talk dirty about Jim.
Yeah, I know. Do you know what's funny, actually? What I hadn't realized until I started this is how many nicknames they gave the royals back then. Like it was Jimmy. It was Jimmy. Oh yeah. Pamphlets and stuff. They would because they had to make it rhyme. Yeah. So very, very much so. So it would have been like they call George the First. Like George II's fat dad and stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Good times. Dunce the First was succeeded by Dunce the Second. Divine Right of Queens. It was right in front of me, Amanda.
Gareth needs a nap because you didn't get there. It's time for sleepy times.
Yeah, and do you know what? James is not someone who would take any pride in someone not getting there. That is just not what you would want to hear.
Gareth, we love
you.
We
made it.
We love you so much.
Yeah.
You can come back. You can come back anytime. We love you.
Said James to Buckingham. Yeah.
We love you.
Thank you so much.
We love your
thank you. This has been wonderful. It's been great fun.
Right. Shall I count us out then before we get derailed further?
Do it.
Right. We're going to see you all next time. We're going to leave in 3, 2, 1. Bye.
Bye.